Welcome to Scandal Water, where the tea is hot and the conversation lively.
Your hosts, Candy
And Ashley,
will discuss a peculiar story somehow related to the entertainment industry. This podcast might not change the world, but it just might satisfy your thirst for an intriguing tale.
Oh, it's that time of day. Tune in and hear what the ladies say. It's time to bend your ear when the silver screen appears. Stories about the stage and screen and everything in between. So come on and join the fun. The curtain opens in 3, 2, 1.
Happy Thanksgiving, Ashley.
happy Thanksgiving, Candy.
You know, this is a special time of the year,
It is.
and we have a special episode today.
We really do.
We are heading into an interview with Tori Murden McClure. Let me tell you how this went down. You all know that we often call for listener requests. Well, a young lady named Ashton suggested that we do an episode about Tori Murden McClure, who, if you are not aware, among many other accomplishments, she is the first woman and the first American to row solo across the Atlantic. She recorded all of her personal experiences in a book. You're going to hear a lot more about that very shortly, but it also ended up being turned into a musical. Again, you'll hear more about Row as well. But what happened was, after Ashton sent the suggestion, I reached out to Tori, who happens to be president of Spalding University. And a huge shout out to Susan, who must be the most organized and efficient and warm executive assistant ever,
Definitely.
because she got back to me within a day. She had checked in with Tori, who agreed very graciously to do the interview. And thank you to Susan, who has worked to help set this up for us.
And not only an interview, but a live in-person interview.
That is right.
Which is our second one we've ever done. So, I had a little bit of nerves going into it. And I have to give a shout out to our friend and listener of the show, big fan, Hayden.
Yes,
who
thank you,
came with
Hayden.
us to act as our technical assistant. And I was very grateful for him because we got it all set up. We were ready to go. And there was a radio signal interference. We could hear music coming through the microphone. So he was able to troubleshoot it and help us figure out how to get the radio sound out. But the one thing we couldn't fix was there's a little intermittent beeping for about the first 4 minutes of the interview, but then it goes away after those first 4 minutes. So if you can just kind of hang with us for those first 4, it'll go away.
That's right. And because this was a very special interview and occasion, we set up a video camera. If you are interested in viewing rather than just listening, you can go on over to the Scandal Water Podcast YouTube channel and you can actually watch the interview, because we filmed this in President McClure's office and it is gorgeous.
Yes,
it is gorgeous.
The bookshelf was beautiful.
And a lot of artifacts, which actually get mentioned later in the interview. So the few little teasers there, but we are getting ready to go into this interview now. You're about to hear from Tori Murden McClure.
Let's dive in.
We are here with President McClure, who has asked us to call her Tori. I'm not sure I can do that because I'm going to tell you guys, I am a little starstruck here, but I'm going to try. Tori, thank you so much for speaking with us. It is such an honor. And we are just beyond excited about this opportunity. I'm not sure if we mentioned this in our initial email to you, but for our podcast, we offer the opportunity for listeners to send in suggestions. And that is how you came across our radar. A lovely young woman wrote to us telling us how much you have impressed her and influenced her. And so when we realized, you were so gracious about agreeing to this interview, when we realized that we were going to get to speak with you, we reached out to Ashton and we asked if she would like to record a brief message, which she was delighted to do. And so I'm going to play that just briefly.
I met Tori Murden McClure the summer before my senior year of high school at the Kentucky Governor Scholars Program. I didn't really have any idea who she was, to be quite honest. I got to hear a little bit of her story from some of the faculty, and I was just kind of excited to get to meet someone from Kentucky who had done such amazing things. I was just really captivated by her story, and not even the story of her rowing across the ocean, but just the other stories of her life. The way that she just pursued her passions with such reckless abandon in a way that I can only aspire. I mean, it's so hard to even think about. But at the end of her book, she says, "Many have asked why I waited so many years to write this book. The simplest answer is that I had to get comfortable with a life defined by something as small as a rowboat before I could write about it and still leave room enough to grow." And I find that so interesting because when I think about Tori Murden McClure, I don't think about this thing that she did. I first think about all of the things that she is. I mean, she is so humble and kind. When I read her book, my mom read it and asked her to come and speak at Eminence High School, and I had the pleasure of being able to give her a tour of my school, or the school where I had just graduated. And the way that she was so attentive to everyone and asked their questions. And I remember one of the things that she said was that every person in the room was better than her at something. And you just don't meet people like that. This woman who had done so many things and deserves so much more recognition that than what she has, and yet would still stand up in front of a group of 12-year-olds and say something like that. I would hope that in anything that I ever do or achieve that I could approach it with the humility that Tori does. There's so many crazy stories about the way that her book was supposed to be a bestseller, or that she was supposed to do this or that, and it didn't work out and she didn't get the recognition. But at the end of the day, I think that for the people that do know her and do know her story, that she's deeply touched each and every one of them. I've only had the honor and the privilege of speaking with her for a few moments, once or twice. So I can't imagine the impact that she's had on thousands of people from all of her speaking engagements and things that she's done.
So thank you to Ashton for that, but wow, what a tribute. What a tribute. And I know that so many others feel the same way, which again is why we are very honored to talk to you. You have achieved so much, but we're really going to hone in today on the achievement that Ashton did reference, your accomplishment, your feat of being the first woman and the first American to row solo across the Atlantic, which you chronicled in your very personal book, A Pearl in the Storm, How I Found My Heart in the Middle of the Ocean. And then it later, of course, became a musical. We'll get to that in a minute. But your book, Ashley and I have both read it, both loved it, and we are very excited to get to ask you about the book and of course, your experiences. So,
well, first, let me thank Ashton because, when I've been speaking to the Governor Scholars Program since 1996. I missed the summer of 1998 because I was in the middle of the ocean. But other than that, I have, pretty faithfully done. Usually I do their opening convocations. One year I was climbing Denali, or better known as Mount McKinley, and so I had to do one of the later convocations for Governor Scholars, and I learned very quickly you want to do the opening convocation because by the time they're a few weeks in, they're too cool for school. But if you're there one of the first days, they're still scared and attentive, and nice. it's very, very nice. But the Governor Scholars have been a great group of young people with whom to speak each year because they're super bright and they give me such hope for the future of the Commonwealth, and it's nice to be able to, corrupt the youth of the state. Yeah.
wow.
In a good way.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, goodness. In the dedication of your book, you give a beautiful explanation of the story behind your boat's name. Would you mind sharing that with our listeners?
Right. So there are a couple variations of the story. Isaac Dinesen writes about every pearl being an adventure, but the notion is that a dream is like a grain of sand that works its way into an oyster, and the more that you're willing to work at it, the more it can become a pearl. And as I was writing the book, I was thinking about all the people who have been pearls in my life, and I particularly like pearls because men don't wear pearls.
Yeah.
But it's rare to see a man with pearls.
That's true.
It's sort of a classically female piece of jewelry. And my boat, the American Pearl, is a boat that I built. I didn't design it. It was designed by a British fellow, Philip Morrison. But I did physically build the boat and rebuild the boat, and that sense of growing something, building something, chasing a dream. I think we all have those things that we're willing to work at. I particularly think of parents and the need to work at raising children and being engaged and shaping their futures, but not controlling them in a way that stifles their ability to learn and grow on their own. Which is why I've chosen to be in education.
On page 17, you said, I knew I could spend a quarter of a year without people, but going a quarter of a year without books was unimaginable, which I can identify with that. So my question is, if you were forced to narrow it down to 2 books that you could have taken on your trip, what would they have been?
You know, you often get asked the question of, if you're marooned on a desert island, what book would you take?
Right.
And typically I say, I would take a book about the island.
Right.
But if I could only choose 2 books, they'd be the complete works of Shakespeare and the Bible. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily the Bible for religious reasons, although I went to divinity school at Harvard. I have a strong faith background. But it's a book that's been around for thousands of years and has been written and rewritten. We like to pretend God wrote it, but there's lots of historical evidence that says, lots of humans intervened. But it's still the greatest literature that humanity has compiled into one reference. Mm-hmm. And the complete works of Shakespeare. It's the greatest writing in the English language anyway. Yeah. There's certainly pretty amazing things in the Eastern tradition, but we're not as familiar with them.
And it's a good way to get many books in one. The complete works.
That's right.
Multiple works.
That's right.
So it's working around it. I
That's
like
right.
that.
Although I do have a beef with Shakespeare. I think there are something like 32 plays. I don't think there's a happy marriage in one of them.
No. No.
Point.
And as a happily married woman, I'd like to, just
Yes.
pick a fight about that.
Brief sidebar. Do you think that he wrote all of his books? Because there's a controversy. Did he write it? Was it Francis Bacon? Did he have other people? I don't know if it was Francis Bacon, but
Earl of Oxford.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who do you think he was the author?
Oh, you're going to get me in trouble with lots of people,
Really?
but I am Earl of Oxford.
You'd think so?
Ooh.
Yeah, because if you study his life and
Uh-huh.
his experiences, there are a lot of he was in Venice. He got marooned by pirates and left for dead on the beach. So lots of things that show up in Shakespeare's play just happen to happen
Happened to
in
him.
that gentleman's life. And it's the Edward de Vere, I forget his proper name, but it doesn't roll off the tongue. But there's a whole controversy in academia about if you're an Earl of Oxford person, then you're a snob.
Really?
And you don't think that a relatively uneducated gentleman, that we have one extant thing that we know he wrote, which was his will. It doesn't match the language of the plays.
Right.
There's all this sort of you're on the side of privilege if you think it was the Earl of Oxford and not William Shakespeare.
You're just going by evidence.
I don't know. I'm not gonna firmly say
Okay.
it is because nobody knows for sure.
That's right. So my actual follow-up question was, I was curious, why did you, when you went on your original trip, why did you choose the book written by Anne Morrow Lindbergh? What drew you to her specifically, instead of, say, Amelia Earhart, who is in Roe?
Yeah, so Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote a lovely book called A Gift from the Sea. And it is clearly written in her later life. Mm-hmm. And the opening chapter, she's headed to the beach. And absolutely, again, a woman of privilege. But had horrible things happen. Her child was kidnapped and killed, and lots of challenges with being married to a famous man, Charles Lindbergh, and he was pretty much vilified during World War II because he had some, respect for German engineering, and so we all are open to really painful episodes and things that aren't necessarily within our control. Perception takes over, and then we're in the soup, and we didn't really have anything to do with getting into the soup, or we reacted badly to something that we should have reacted badly to, and it got overblown. But that sense of she describes life as different shells from the beach, sort of simple phases in your early life, and it gets more complex, and then you're a multi-chambered nautilus is one of her later shells. That sense of we are layers of experience and pain and healing. And I serve on one of the boards at the Carter Center in Atlanta, Rosalind Carter and President Jimmy Carter, and it's on mental health. And that sense of folks were talking about trauma, and one of the very thoughtful people says we need to stop talking about trauma and start talking about healing.
Right,
healing
from the trauma.
Healing from the trauma, and that, rather than saying, well, so-and-so was traumatized, it's like so-and-so needs some time to heal.
Yeah.
And that the emphasis needs to be not on the harm, but on the healing and the work we need to do to heal one another from the wrongs in the world. Yeah. The other thing is, Anne Morrow Lindbergh was a Smithy, and I went to Smith College.
Oh, nice.
And I get to meet her once. I was going to ride my bicycle home from school, Smith College, Massachusetts, to Kentucky. And I was a sophomore at the time, and she was visiting during commencement, and I and two friends went to see her, and we explained that we were going to ride our bicycles from Massachusetts to Kentucky. We actually ended up going from Niagara Falls. But I rolled out this map, and I said, I've talked these two friends into riding with me to Kentucky. And I pointed to Massachusetts and then Kentucky, and I said, look, it's all downhill. I told them it was all downhill. And she said, are you the navigator? I said, yes, I am. And she just smiled.
That's funny.
My background is actually as an English teacher and a literacy coach. And so as I was reading your book, I had so many fun noticings about your structure and your organizational techniques. And so two that came to mind were how you used quotes or excerpts from literary texts to introduce new chapters or new sections. And the other was, it was so interesting to me that the majority of your book was dedicated to your first trip, while a relatively small amount of print went towards your second trip.
Right.
So knowing how intentional you are,
Yeah.
I was going to ask you as an author, what led you to make those decisions?
Well, like most people, I think I learn more from my failures than I do from my successes. And the other thing is I had a very wise, the agent who helped sort of market my book or get it printed by HarperCollins, which is a very reputable house, said, Tori, you had to row across the ocean twice. Your reader does not.
Nice.
And sort of the sense that the second trip wasn't dramatically different. And the only thing that informed the second trip in a way that was different from the first is I had fallen in love with McClure. And so the elements that sort of touched on Mac, are we missing Mac, and the need to be finished with this part of my quest is what ended up in that sort of second part of the book. But it is, the second row is, the successful row is almost an also ran in the book. And we can talk about that again when we take up the question of the musical, because I think it made it hard for the writers of the musical to figure out how to do that.
Oh, interesting. Yes.
So again, as readers, she and I noticed many instances where in the midst of an informative or suspenseful passage, there would suddenly be a quip, a little humorous quip. For example, one of my favorites, and one that Candy and I both identify with pretty deeply, is from page 149, where it says, I would rather pry 1,000 dead squid off the deck of my boat than enter a room full of strangers for the purpose of engaging in small talk. Yes. So what importance do you place on humor, and how did your own sense of humor support you on your original quest?
Let's just go back to the truth of that statement. I've have young people ask me all the time, are you afraid of anything? I said, yes, cocktail parties. Yes. Cocktail parties terrify me.
Yes.
You're entering a room with no plan or script, and I can be a bit of a lump at such things. And then inevitably somebody will ask me about a rowboat. I will not want to talk about rowboats at the cocktail party, but I will, end up talking about rowboats. And then there's this little circle around me, and I'm not a lump anymore. But it's torturous, because I'd love to talk about ideas, and I'd love to talk about challenges and dreams and hopes and aspirations, but
my go-to is always, what do you think about time travel? And they'll either keep them in the conversation or they'll go away, and it's like, oh, great.
but that sense of humor, when you've done the sorts of things I have done, you become a favorite guinea pig for psychological testing. Like, I think for years I was on some list at U of L for psychology classes that, well, go test her. And it was so prevalent that eventually I called the faculty member and I said, my name is Tori Murden McClure. And he said, I'm sorry. And I said, why? He goes, I send all my most challenging students to you. I said, well, why is that? He goes, nobody can mess up a data set like you can.
Wow.
In that I don't test as, typical.
Right.
I had a lovely battery of tests when I was still in divinity school at Harvard. I had skied to the South Pole, and the psychology folks at Harvard wanted to test me and figure out where you fall on sort of a way out of the box, creative, connecting dots nobody else would think of. Way out to the side, I'm a genius. And then in the sort of nuts and bolts, rational thinking, engineering kind of stuff, I'm a genius. In the middle, where most people live their lives in those areas of social skills, not so much. But because I have both sides, I can fill in the gaps in the middle. So I don't test on the spectrum, but I have to think about it. And many people don't. Yeah.
I'm gonna switch to a little bit about your family for just a second. So the primary plotline follows your quest to row across the Atlantic, of course, but flashbacks to your childhood are used to develop one of your subplots. And I'm sure that I speak for everyone who has read your book or hopefully heard the musical that we fell in love with your brother Lamar.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to know, how is he doing today?
He's doing really well. He lives about 10 minutes from me. I knew I married the right guy when Lamar called the house and said, I not need cock to you, I need cock to Mac. Like, nice. I gotta talk to a guy, I don't want to talk to you. And and I've often said Lamar, the best parts of who I am come from Lamar, and the worst parts of who I am come from growing up with, trying to defend him and take care of him.
Yeah.
Just a little editorial comment. For those of you who've not yet read this book, you need to. It is just so personal, so captivating, and also just impressive. But I think hearing you say that is so satisfying for people who have read it, because you leave the book, and obviously I wanted to know more about you, but I also wanted to know, how are things going with Mac and how is Lamar?
Yes,
so to hear you share that you guys are all together doing well is just such a lovely thing. Yeah. Yes. Well, at one point in your story, you talk about a very kind-hearted and I think somewhat brave young man named Eric, who showed what you refer to as benevolent leadership by standing up for Lamar and saying, nobody can pick on him, he can't defend himself. Yeah. And you talk about how incredibly impactful that was to both you and Lamar. And so what I would ask is, what are some ways you think we could promote more benevolent leadership in our society today?
Yeah, it's probably worth me sort of stepping back and telling this story.
Yes.
Lamar and I, we moved a lot as young people, and so got in the habit of being the new kids on the block. And I had learned that one of the ways you can make friends is to be a successful athlete. If you were good at basketball or baseball or whatever the sport of the season was, you would get invited to play. And so I was playing basketball at the local playground, and Lamar was on the sidelines, and out of the corner of my eye I watched a little boy pick up a rock and throw it at my brother. And before he could pick up a second rock, I had tackled him. He was my size or bigger, but I just put him down. And if it were a cartoon, you would have seen fists and feet in the cloud of dust. And a young man named Eric Fee and another boy named Dale Ellis came and kind of pulled us apart. And they kind of queried the situation, and he threw a rock at my brother, and they take the young boy off sort of to the other side of the playground and interrogate him. From my point of view, they were interrogating him. And then they kind of dragged him back to my brother and made him apologize.
Nice.
I had never seen anything like that, ever. And I was blown away. And then Eric Fee pulled all the young children on the playground. It was after school, there weren't any adults. Pulled all the children in the playground into a circle and said, no one will tease or taunt Lamar. He can't defend himself. It's not fair. And if you do, I'm going to settle the score. And somebody asked about me. What about her? I think she can take care of herself. But that had such an important influence on my life, and influences to me to this day. That sense of, I want to be in a position to be able to dictate the rules on the playgrounds on which I stand. And Eric did that by being one of the best students in our class. Forget one of the best. He was the best student in our class. And he was one of the best athletes. And that sense of being a scholar athlete kind of defined the brand that I wanted to search, my whole life. I wanted to be a scholar and an athlete. And it has served me well, because with that combination, there are many opportunities to be able to create peace and justice out of thin air, which is what Eric did for me.
Have you kept up with Eric? Does he know about your book and how much you attribute to him?
Well, the book was almost going to come out, I sent the passage. I tracked down Eric Fee, and I sent him the passage, and I said, I don't want to say anything that doesn't feel accurate. This is how I remember it. What's your recollection? He was honest. He said, I don't remember that event, but it rings true. And he had gone on, he studied at Harvard, went to medical school, became a physician. He played football at Harvard. When the musical was about to come out, there's this lovely song devoted to Eric Fee. And I think it's called Ode to Eric Fee. And HR, the head of human resources here at Spalding, said, so what's Eric Fee's real name? And I said, Eric Fee.
It's a great name.
And she's like, does he know he's part of a musical? I'm like, ooh, maybe I should reach out again. And so he came when there was a full production at the Williamstown Theater Festival in the summer of 2021. Eric came.
Oh,
and
nice.
There was this
What a full circle moment.
completely, gushy moment of me being a total basket case. Happily married, waiting for Eric Fee to come. And, he came with his girlfriend, and my husband's there, and he's got his girlfriend, and I'm going, and in my mind, he would have been 6'6" with the body of a Greek god. And he was, my height, maybe a teeny bit shorter. And, he
Just
was
a regular person.
60, late 50s as I was. And okay.
But isn't it funny how just something was so significant to you, and he didn't quite remember it, but thought it rang true. And that happens so much in our lives, where someone will say something, it just changes your life. And they're just living their authentic self.
Being a person of
character. And it just changes people.
Yeah, I had someone reach out to me, not unlike Ashton, who said, I sprained my ankle and you carried me down the stairs. And it was a basketball player, and I was, carrying a teammate down the stairs, but I didn't remember it. Yeah.
It was just another thing, another day for you. Of course I would do that.
Yeah, I was big and strong, and I go down the stairs.
Just a quick follow-up question, thinking about that idea of benevolent leadership and how it's impacted your life. Has that had any impact on the fact that your university is one of the first compassionate universities?
Yeah, I mean, it's both compassion and competition, I'm embarrassed to admit. One of a gentleman with whom I went to divinity school approached me and said, hey, we could make Spalding a compassionate university. And I said, I got work to do, get out of my office, I'm busy. And he said, well, Stanford's thinking about becoming a compassionate university. And I'm like, sign me up. And in retrospect, it was a huge mistake, because if Stanford had become the world's first compassionate university, there would be hundreds of institutions that had signed on to the Charter for Compassion. And so it was a failure of ego on my part. But I do feel very strongly that compassion is what's needed in our world. And as it's phrased in the Charter for Compassion, we must dethrone ourselves from the center of our world and place another there. And that sense of every one of the world's religions has some variation of the Golden Rule. And to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Although Karen Armstrong, who did the bulk of the writing on their charter, would say that's the easy way. In the oldest variation of the Golden Rule that we agree on, scholars agree on, I shouldn't call myself a scholar in that context, It comes from Confucius, who says, whatever is hurtful to you, you must refuse under any circumstances to do to another. Judaism picks up one of the earliest variations, and I imagine a miscreant first-year student asks Rabbi Hillel, if you can recite the whole of Torah while standing on one foot, I will convert to Judaism. And he stands on one foot and he says, do not do unto others what you would not have them do unto you, which I think is the harder variation than the positive version. Yeah.
I'm going to move to your boat now.
Yeah.
So in the book on page 5, for those who would like to look it up when you read it, you compare the size of the watertight sleeping area to that of a double wide coffin. So it is no secret to our listeners that I'm a big chicken. I'm afraid of absolutely almost everything. We make jokes about it and whatnot. So this is the part of the story that I was panicking for you. And so the passage on page 14, this is where I had to set the book down and go, whew, okay. You said there were no landmarks. There was no land. I'm committed now. No diving overboard. No swimming back to shore. And I got heart palpitations on this. So this moment of no return was, as I said, the moment of fright for me as a reader on your behalf. My wonderings are, and there's 2 of them, was there any moment besides the obvious encounter with Hurricane Danielle where you actually did feel a moment of fear? And after that, could you tell us some words of encouragement for others, such as myself, every day of my life, who may be facing their own moment of no return or something they're afraid of?
I want to recommend a song for you.
Okay.
Grace McLean, who played Tori.
She was wonderful.
Yeah, she's stupendous. Somebody asked, what's it like watching a musical about yourself? And I said, it's like getting stripped naked in public, only it turns out I'm in my mid-30s, I've got a great body, I have amazing talent, and I'm a redhead.
Yes.
But she has a song called Natural Disaster. Look it up.
Okay.
It's awesome.
Okay.
But you have the sense, I don't know that Grace herself is that person, but it's the I'm afraid of everything. And it's just a fantastic song.
Okay.
Natural Disaster by Grace McLean.
Thank you. All right, I will do that.
And I would absolutely recommend it to anybody, and you can find it on YouTube.
Okay.
But that sense of we're all afraid of something, and we all have moments in our lives where we cross the threshold and there's no going back. And you know, historically you think of Caesar crossing the Rubicon and, you know, let the bridge be burned behind me. And you just can't make your way back even when you want to. Kind of in one of those situations in my life right now that we've gone past the tipping point. And they're often the most difficult moments in our lives, sort of the forks in the road. And as I was writing my book, I realized the story, because I didn't want it to be a story about me, which was a challenge as I was writing it. I did that Master's of Fine Arts in Writing program here at Spalding, and it was all of my faculty mentors who were like, yeah, it's a really boring book if you're just going to write about a rowboat rowing itself across the Atlantic Ocean. Right. And so I had to put myself in the story, but I was self-conscious about it. And it wasn't until I started to write about the people who stood at the forks in the road of my life that the story turned to a story that I felt good about telling. And we all have moments of doubt. We all have moments when we've crossed some threshold and we can't make it back. And those are the moments we need to look for the mentors or the guides or the coaches or the friends who will steer us in the right direction. Someone recently said, when one door closes, another door opens, but it's really uncomfortable in the hallway.
Yes. That's right.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the mentor, and I, again, as an English teacher, I thought about your use of the hero's journey, which was so interesting to me because I could see that. But that also segues into my next question. You've spoken many times about Muhammad Ali. If I understand correctly, you were the first employee for the Muhammad Ali Center.
First full-time employee. There were plenty of other folks that did way more than I did, but I was the first full-time employee of the Ali Center.
But what a fascinating job to have, and I mean, wow. But in that context, you came across him several times, and very famously, he said to you, you don't want to go through life as the woman who almost rowed across the Atlantic. Why did that have the impact on you that it did?
Well, let's go back and talk about the hero's journey. The hero's journey there are thousands and thousands of variations of the hero's journey in human history and literature. It is invariably a men's story. Like men write the hero's journey. And women write about romance.
Yes.
And, and you kind of get scolded if you're a woman writing as if you were Odysseus. And it's not for us. And so as my book was on the eve of publication, I'm like, oh my goodness, I sold out. My book is hero's journey, hero's journey, hero's journey, love
Romance.
story.
Romance.
And I'm like, I sold out. I gave in to peer pressure. Oh my gosh, how did I do that? And yet, it's just how it happened.
Uh-huh.
But women are pressured to write about relationships. And men are pressured to write about their deeds in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the hero's journey is about deeds in the world. It's usually about leaving the world you know or the home you know, going out into the world, meeting mentors and guides who lead you in the right direction. There are also villains and roadblocks and speed bumps that make it difficult, that you have to, things you have to overcome. Where women are, in the I need to find love, I need to find connection, I need to raise children. And in my professional life, I have rarely been really stymied by men. It is women who call me to conform.
Interesting.
And I
That
had a
makes sense.
friend think through that with me once, and she said, well, as mothers, we really want our children to conform because we know that their lives will be easier if we teach them to conform. And yet, for me, it's always been a strain of, well, you're succeeding really well, but you're not feminine enough in how you're doing it. And boy, that has toasted my cookies more than once.
Yeah.
Yes. That's so interesting. We were talking about this not long ago, just in the context of something that happened in our lives. Something else we related to that you said that was along the same thread was that oftentimes women will also be criticized for wanting to accomplish something just that's a goal of their own, unless there's a cause attached to it or some noble thing that's for other people.
Right.
Whereas that's never the case with men.
Right. They just wanted to do it, so they went and did it.
Right.
Yes.
They're not saving whales or, trying to work on climate change or anything else. And yeah, that's a challenge too. But you asked about Muhammad Ali, and he was just a magical human being and had lots of supporters and friends. The person who most comes to mind is Lani Ali, his last wife, who is herself an incredible human. And certainly in Muhammad's last decades, she was the spokesperson. And people often would forget that it wasn't Muhammad Ali that said this or that. It was Lani who said, Muhammad thinks, or Muhammad feels, or Muhammad believes. And she was just magnificent. But Muhammad Ali, I have often said, had a soft spot for broken people. And I was broken at that time. And you don't get to be the world champion 3 times if you don't lose twice along the way. And he was removed from boxing at the height of his career because of his unwillingness to join the military and go to Vietnam. And if you read the record of that, the injustice was profound. Talk about crossing a tipping point and losing the life you know, the height of his career. And we couldn't have been more different. Muhammad Ali had an ego as big as the Himalaya mountains. and yet it wasn't offensive because, you meet those egotists who are like, I'm great, you stink. That wasn't Muhammad. I'm great and you're cool because you're with me. It was kind of his being.
Yes.
And he knew I'd been knocked down on the mat and that I needed to get up. And he never actually used the words, kid, you gotta get up, but his being said, kid, you gotta get up. Kid, you gotta get up. But he waited for a very long time until he knew I was ready. And then he said, you don't want to go through life as the woman who almost rowed across the ocean. And Would I have done it anyway? Probably. Having Muhammad Ali as an excuse, pretty darn good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He may have. Was this at the point where was the rumors out that someone else was going to do it at that point? Because he may have known you and gone, if I put in front of her that somebody else and her spirit of competition makes
Yeah,
you
there were two sort of mentors at the time that they never met. But Gerard d'Abbeville, the French man.
I loved him in the book.
Yeah, he rowed solo across the Atlantic and then soloed the Pacific. First man to solo both oceans. And he was an amazing friend. He's still alive, friend and mentor. He had the boat. Gerard had the boat.
Mm-hmm.
So after the 1990 row, I set the boat adrift. When I got on the Independent Spirit, or more accurately, they set the boat adrift because they couldn't lift it because the cleats pulled out of the side of the boat. And so they just had to let go of the boat. And it was eventually picked up by an American oil tanker and taken to France. And French customs wouldn't let them offload the boat without paying a duty. And the captain said, but it's not worth anything. It's an ocean rowboat. And they were like, well, why did you stop and pick it up if it's just an ocean rowboat? So around and around they went. And I called Gerard, who was a member of the European Parliament at the time. He's kind of the Charles Lindbergh of France.
Okay.
And said, Gerard, there's this problem. They won't offload my boat. It's in Le Havre. And he called back just a few minutes later and said, there is no problem. Your boat will be offloaded tomorrow. And so offloaded the boat. And Gerard held on to it till he knew about the other women wanting to do it. He helped move the boat to Germany where UPS could fly it home.
That's amazing.
But it was sort of that two amazing athletes in different parts of the world, different personalities, both kind of recognizing here was somebody who had started something, here was somebody who needed to finish something, and they both helped to make it happen.
If you could go back and relive one moment from either of those trips, what do you think that you would choose to relive?
You know, I'll just say the moment that leapt to mind when you asked the question. Stepping out of the boat literally into Mac's arms.
I was going to guess that. I was either going to guess that or the when you called him to propose.
Yeah. I would not want to relive that. I was like, as all folks in similar situations, I obsessed about it, thought about it, obsessed about it, worked on the words. When I get out of this rowboat, will you marry me? Sure, why not?
I know.
I'm like, that was not exactly what I was hoping for.
The grand romantic. Yeah, sure. I got nothing better to do on Sunday. Let's do it.
That's right.
You do mention in the book that you've been rowing for over a decade when you set off on your first attempt. So is rowing still a part of your life?
I rowed this morning.
Nice. Yeah. Where do you row?
On the Ohio River. I didn't row on the Ohio this morning. I rowed on the machine in the basement this morning. But typically I row on the Ohio River.
Solo, or do you
Solo. And I rowed for many years in a double scull with one other person. And, it's just, my schedule here makes it hard. It's 20 minutes to get to the river.
How long does it take to go across? How long can you do it? Or how fast?
Oh, it depends on which part of the river, but it's, in some places it's a mile across.
Okay.
But I can row faster than I can run in terms of crossing distance. But I'm also a slow runner. But yeah, so in the time it takes me to get to the boathouse and back, I can do a really, really good workout in the basement. And so, in this job, time is sometimes the most important commodity we have.
Well, changing gears, we have mentioned the musical Row a few different times now, which loved.
Yeah.
It's available on Audible.
Yeah.
And first, I wanted to ask you, how did that come about?
Well, we were, it was probably about a decade ago. I was in this office, sitting at this table, when two wonderful artists, not unlike the two of you, came and said, hey, we'd like to get the rights to your book to perhaps write a musical. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm an introvert, I don't want a musical, I don't want anything to do with a musical, no! And Dawn Landis, who is from Louisville and was a Governor Scholar in 1998, so she was a scholar who missed me, pulled out her guitar and sang two songs that were really smart and really on target. One of the songs, I shed a tear. It was just really touching. And I thought, okay, wait a minute. it's a musical about a woman alone in a rowboat. It's going nowhere, right? What's the fear? I'm never going to see these people again. Don't crush their dreams. Yes, you have my permission. They're like, no, seriously, what would it take to get the rights? I'm like, that's right, I'm a lawyer. Here, I'll write it down. You have my permission. And I slid the paper across the desk. They looked at each other. They went back to New York City, where they were both living at the time. They sent me a box of cookies. So Mac tells anyone who will listen that I sold the rights to my book for a box of cookies. And then they went and did it. Yeah. And it's wonderful. And so true to me and so true to the book. They worked incredibly hard. And like the book, the show had its own hurricanes because it was supposed to premiere summer of 2020. Got canceled because of COVID. They kept the cast together, and I think Row was the first musical in history to premiere on the Audible format. It's a beautiful recording. Then it was produced the summer of 2021 at Williamstown, but because of COVID, they had to do it all outside. It rained epically. I am Princess Dark Cloud. It rained epically. And, the technical crew walked off because of the, working conditions. They literally performed it over water on a reflecting pool behind an art museum.
Wow.
And
I was going to ask, what did the staging look like?
It was just really, really difficult for the cast. They never really got to find their stride because they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off. And I went to see the final night, and the technologies just went poof, and they couldn't do the closing night. They couldn't do opening night because of rain, and they couldn't do closing night because.
So you didn't get to actually see it?
No, I got to see it in between.
Okay,
I got to see it 3 times.
Okay.
And with friends each evening, different friends each evening, and it was pretty magical.
Listening to it, I was so disappointed that I couldn't find any video clips. I wanted to see it so badly, and I couldn't find any. But
I don't think they were ever able to do a video of a full production between rain and the evening. They had lots of cameras. For some reason, cameras didn't work. It was really kind of snake bitten.
Wow, that's so disappointing.
I hope Roe does not have the reputation of Macbeth.
Yes. But it was interesting because listening to it, it is beautiful. The songs, the voices, it was so beautiful. But there were a few changes, which I'm assuming are probably narrative economy and dramatization. You have to do some little things here and there. And you also spoke about some of the challenges. How do you represent some of these things, in this type of a setting? So what's one of your favorite things about how they moved it from page to stage?
I saw a very early version in New York at a place called Joe's Pub. And I thought that Joe's Pub would be like the Rudyard Kipling here in Louisville, a little bar with a stage, which it kind of is. But it's off the Public Theater, and it's where Hamilton did its first sort of readings and things. And so it's a prestigious venue, but I didn't know the difference because this is not my world. But I went, and the show I saw that evening is nothing like
what it
Roe
became.
Roe as it is today. And if Roe goes on, it will be very different. And that evening, I remember going to see Dawn and Danny downstairs and saying, "You will be under pressure to change the story. It is your story now. You can change it." And they looked at me horrified. I mean, the looks on their face were horrified because they've still maintained integrity to the story and integrity to me as a human. An example would be when they were casting for Roe, they worked very hard to find just the right actor to play Lamar. And one of the questions was, should we cast a Down syndrome actor? Lamar's not Down syndrome. And how do they go about casting him? And Lamar is profoundly, has profound hearing loss. And so they ended up hiring a deaf actor, which was absolutely appropriate. But John McGinty, who played Lamar, was astounding in his grace, in his understanding of the character, and he sounded so much like Lamar.
Really?
That it sort of filled in some gaps of my own perception of my brother's intellectual disabilities. John played the Hunchback of Notre Dame in a musical on Broadway, and he went to the producers and said, "You need to let me audition because the Hunchback is deaf."
Oh.
And they're like, but it's a musical. He's
Yeah.
like, you need to let me audition because the Hunchback is deaf. Yeah, but it's a musical. And what they ended up doing is they hired John because he's magnificent. And they had a singing actor follow John as he played the part. But nobody was looking at the other actor because
Right.
John was so powerful in his
That
performance.
is fascinating.
And so he's an amazing person. And so the folks they had for that production of Row, both for the Audible and for the full production, the gentleman who played Mac in the full production is Andy Grotlucian, a very well-known sort of Shakespearean actor, and he nailed Mac. He was great. He was perfect as Mac. Yeah.
Do you know of any plans for
I
Rose?
do not. Apparently
Okay.
during COVID, every famous writer wrote something. So they're doing Andrew Lloyd Webber again and other things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Although Grace McLean is playing in an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical
Wow.
right now, Bad Cinderella
Oh,
on Broadway.
cool.
Yeah.
Is she the
She's the
Cinderella?
queen.
The queen. Cool.
Nice.
She's the queen. Yes.
While your story is inspiring to everyone, many young girls like Ashton consider you a personal hero. Clearly, she does. What do you hope other young women might be able to take away from your story?
One of the greatest gifts given to me early in my life was I went to public schools my whole life and then came to Louisville to take care of a grandmother who had Alzheimer's and was able to go to a private school, a very good private school, Louisville Collegiate School. It was a shock for me and it was a shock for them. I was not a natural fit at collegiate. In my being, did not belong there, but the faculty really and truly taught me how to do my homework, and that has served me well. And only in the times I have not really done my homework have I been embarrassed by my performance in anything. But in the times when I have put in the work and done the homework and done the time, things have been very successful.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
I think you even referenced this in your book, but it is just so clear when we read about you and consider your accomplishments. You are a woman who knows how to set and achieve big goals. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but in the late 80s, you became the first American and the first woman in history to reach the South Pole by an overland route.
Right, there was another woman, Shirley Metz, and there were other Americans. So I was among the first
Okay.
women and first Americans to reach the South Pole by an overland route. I quite recently did a speech in Jackson, Wyoming, and they said, she's first American, first woman. And one of my expedition mates lives in Jackson. It was like, what am I, chopped liver?
Right.
And so, for decades, I was very careful to correct that, and then I stopped correcting it, and then I got busted. But we all touched the pole at the same time, so we could each claim to have been the first.
Oh,
But yeah.
nice. Well, then, of course, in the late 90s, as we've been discussing, you were the first American and the first woman to row solo across the Atlantic. And then in the late 2000s is when you came out with this book, A Pearl in the Storm. So I'm wondering.
And then in the 2020s, Row
Yeah.
came out.
There, oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's next for you? Do you have another big goal that you're working on right now?
I don't know. I mean, I feel there's change in the air and a shift in the wind, and I know I've got lots left to give. And when I am asking for advice from higher powers, it's like, help me to do good in the world. And I don't know what that next thing might be, but I've between being a trustee, a vice president, and a president,
Oh my
I've given
goodness.
25 years to Spalding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm, again, English teacher. I'm drawn to themes, I'm drawn to lessons, and it was so interesting. At one point, it's page 237 if anyone wants to look it up, but you said, the character of America is a crowd with one face, e pluribus unum, out of many one, while the subtitle of your book is How I Found My Heart in the Middle of the Ocean. There were so many times I noticed that it seemed to be, there was a juxtaposition of isolation and the individual
Right.
against the interdependence and the community and what that meant to you. And then you had other lessons in there too. You were talking about jousting against helplessness.
Yeah.
So I would ask you, what is one lesson that you personally took away from your experiences that has just, resonated with you?
Yeah, well, there's a or over in the corner of my office here.
Oh, yes.
And it's signed, and it has a little plaque on it that says, "Though we stand by ourselves, we're never alone."
Mm-hmm.
And I was leaving an office in city government, and my colleagues gave me that oar all signed with that lovely little plaque on it. And I said, "That's a great quote. Who wrote it?" They're like, "You did." And that sense of no one achieves anything by themselves, ever. And the folks who said, "I did this all by myself," well, yeah, did you? I don't think so. And that sense of though we stand by ourselves, we are never alone. And when I talk to young people, and they want to know, "Why did you row across the ocean?" I was like, "Well, I rowed across the ocean because I was stupid. Most women don't have to row 3,333 miles to figure out that love and friendship are good things. Most women just kind of get it."
Yeah.
I was a slow learner, and I learned all my knowledge of the world came from books.
Mm-hmm.
And Muhammad Ali, all his knowledge of the world came from interacting with the world. We all have different points of view, and it's really important, particularly now, to dethrone ourselves from the center of our world.
Mm-hmm.
And try to place ourselves in somebody else's shoes, because we've gotten way too judgmental.
Looking around your office at all of your mementos, do you have a memento that this place is on fire?
Right.
What are you taking?
Apologies, I am looking for a compass that clearly must be at home.
You already got it out of here.
It's already out. It's already gone. So on the top of the bookshelf are some white boots.
Yes.
That I used when I skied to the South Pole.
Yeah.
I'd probably grab that, or I'd grab...
So what is the compass at home?
The compass at home was a compass I used on the 1998 row that was
Okay.
given to me by Barry Bingham, who was a very dear mentor. Mm-hmm. Behind you is a book written by Jimmy Carter, The Craftsmanship of Jimmy Carter. It is signed by Jimmy Carter to me.
Oh, nice.
And I was at the Carter Center in Atlanta in a meeting, and a Secret Service agent came and said, "Mrs. McClure, we need for you to come with us." And I was like, "Ruh-roh." Like, do I need my passport? And I followed him out and up the stairs, and President Carter was standing at the top of the stairs. He said, "I understand you're a woodworker." I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he gave me his book and signed it, and there was just this moment. Actually, a friend had arranged the book to be given to me, but there was this moment with him at the top of the stairs with two introverts running out of things to say to each other. And he said, "Well, I don't want to interrupt your meeting." And I'm like, "You're the President of the United States." And, we have a mutual friend named Rita Thompson who arranged that scene. So, yeah.
That's lovely. Well, my real last question was, is there anything else that you would like to leave our listeners with? Is there any way that they can learn more about you? Where can they buy your book? Anything you would like to leave us with?
If they live in Louisville, Kentucky, they should go to Carmichael's to buy my book.
Okay.
Support local
That's right.
booksellers. If they do not, Amazon,
Amazon.
of course.
Mm-hmm.
They can go to Audible. I think Row is like $5.50. Again, I sold the rights to the book for a box of cookies. I don't get anything for that. It's not a shameless plug for me.
Mm-hmm.
And support local musicians and artists and actors, because they've had a hard run.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
This has just
Lovely.
been,
Very lovely. Thank you.
Yes, just an honor to speak with you.
Thanks.
Well, Ashley, that was amazing.
Yes, it was. It was an amazing experience.
It was. In the moment, my brain was going so many places, taking in what Tori was saying, all the different points she was making, being amazed by some of the things she was sharing.
Right.
But I'm sure we could talk for an hour debriefing on some of our thoughts. But what are just a few things that struck you?
Well, the thing that I identified with the most as far as my journey as a creative person was where she talked about the musical and all the problems they had with the musical. It just was so relatable, and it made me realize it's not special to me. Everybody struggles, everybody has these issues, but the thing to do is to keep pressing forward and to keep working through it. And I think that's the thing I take away from her the most is just, my gosh, the endurance of spirit and of body that she is capable of and still capable of, still rows, still does all of these amazing things. And it was just very inspiring to get out there and do things with your life and to take care of your body and to take care of your mind and your spirit and all that, and keep learning and keep growing.
I like the word you used, relatable, because one thing that hit me was we were meeting with this woman who has set these world records, more than the one that we talked about. You know, she's also skied overland. We mentioned it right there at the end. So she's achieved a number of things. She's worked for a mayor. She's met Muhammad Ali. I mean, she just had so many accomplishments behind her. And yet, talking to her in person, she just felt very real,
She did,
very relatable. That was something I enjoyed. But I think a point that resonated with me was how encouraging she was to everyone, but especially to women.
Yes.
Talking about it's okay for us to set our goals and to go after them. You know, sometimes there are some expectations put on women that aren't necessarily put on men, but you can do it and to go after it. She actually, I think, was encouraging in other ways too, when she talked about support local.
Right. I like that. Yes.
I did too. Talking about, you know, the people who've been suffering. Go out and if you buy her book, go to Carmichael's or to your local bookstore. Right. She was inspiring to me in terms of thinking about how we can really support others and stand behind others and be encouragers while we're also going after our own dreams.
And I think it was a good time of year to do this episode, though. Thanksgiving week, you'd like to take time and reflect and be thankful and start to set goals for yourself, start thinking about the next year. And maybe Tori has inspired you to set a new goal.
Yeah. Good point. So a big thank you and a cheers.
Huge cheers.
To Tori Murden McClure. It was just delightful talking with you. And a happy Thanksgiving to all of our listeners.
Yes. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
We'll see you soon. If you love what we do, please rate and review our show. Or you can become a supporter by making a donation through buymeacoffee.com/scandalwaterpod. Whether a single gift or a recurring monthly donation, it would go a long way towards supporting our work and allowing us to keep the tea brewing.
At our website, www.scandalwaterpodcast.com, you can submit questions or your own story ideas, access our sources and show notes, see the merch we offer for sale, and more. You can join the Scandal Water community through our Scandal Water Podcast Facebook page or follow us on Instagram or TikTok at Scandal Water Podcast.
This episode was executive produced by Candy Thomas, that's me, and Ashley Raymer Brown.
That's me.
It was researched and written by Candy Thomas and edited by Ashley Raymer Brown.
A special thank you to Josh Martin, who wrote, composed, and performed the Scandal Water theme and other music. Matt C. Adams, who created the artwork, and Joshua Reith, who designed our website and provides ongoing technical support.
As a reminder, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes. The thoughts and opinions of the host during each episode of Scandal Water are their own and do not reflect the opinions of any future guests, advertisers, or clearly professional psychologists. Thanks for listening.